Tonight, let's journey to a land where that breath first quickened into something extraordinary. A land between two great rivers, where history was not just written, but lived in mud brick houses, in market squares, in the shadow of towering. Walls dot this land lay like a bridge between giants. To the south, the Nile River poured its life-giving waters through Egypt, nurturing pyramids and pharaohs. To the east, the Tigris and Euphrates danced through Mesopotamia, birthing the first cities and laws, and in between, a narrow strip of hills and valleys, coastal plains and rocky highlands, where every step felt like crossing a border. The Egyptians called it Rechinu, a name that rolled off the tongue like a secret. The Mesopotamians grunted it as Amuru, rough and practical. But the people who lived there, they called it Canaan. Canaan, the land of purple, named for the costly dye their merchants traded across the wine-dark Mediterranean Sea. Let me paint you a picture of Canaan, as it was long before kings and temples, when the world was still finding its feet. Along the coast, the Mediterranean lapped at golden beaches, where fishermen cast nets at dawn and traders unloaded pottery from distant islands. The coastal plain was soft and fertile, dotted with olive groves that shimmered silver in the sun. Farmers here grew wheat and barley, their fields stretching like green carpets to the horizon. This was the land of plenty, where food was never scarce if you could peep it. Inland, the ground rose into limestone hills, their slopes terraced like giant staircases. Here, people carved homes into the rock, their doorways facing east to catch the first light of morning. Olive trees clung to these terraces, their roots digging deep into the stone, while vines heavy with grapes twisted around wooden trellises. Life here was harder than on the coast. You had to fight for every scrap of soil. But the hills had a way of making people stubborn. Resilient dot, then there was the Jordan River, snaking through a deep rift in the earth. It began as a trickle near the snow-capped peak of Mount Hermon, where even in summer, patches of white clung to the rocks like cotton. As it flowed south, it swelled into the Sea of Galilee, a lake so clear you could see fish darting among the stones. Further on, it widened into the Dead Sea, strange, salty, so dense you could float without trying, its shores white with crystals. As if the moon had spilled its dust there. To the north, Mount Hermon loomed, its snow melting into streams that watered the land. To the center, a ridge of highlands rose, where a city called Jerusalem would one day sit like a crown. To the south, the Negev desert stretched towards Sinai, its sand dunes shifting like waves, hiding oases where palm trees whispered secrets to the wind. Can you imagine it? A land of contrasts, sea and desert, hill and valley, plenty and scarcity. A land where every path led somewhere new. A merchant from Egypt with spices in his sacks, a soldier from Mesopotamia with a sword at his hip, a shepherd from the hills, with a flute to chase away the silence. But here's the thing about bridges. Everyone crosses them, and not all who cross come to trade. Long before anyone wrote down stories, people built here. Not just huts, but cities great, sturdy things, with walls thick enough to stop a charging bull. At Jericho, they stacked bricks 10 meters high, wrapping them around nearly 10 acres of land. Inside, 3,000 people lived, farmers storing grain in clay jars, potters spinning bowls on stone wheels, priests murmuring prayers in small shrines. They dug wells deep into the earth, their buckets clinking as they hauled up cool, clear water. We are safe here, they must have thought, patting the walls. Nothing can touch us. But something always did. Further north, at Hazor, a city grew so large it swallowed 200 acres. It sat at a crossroads, Merchants from Mesopotamia heading to Egypt passed through its gates, as did traders from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, carrying copper and gold. The people of Hazor built ramparts, great mounds of earth and stone, to protect their homes, their workshops, their temples. 20,000 people called it home, making it one of the biggest cities in the ancient world. Can you picture the market square? Donkeys braying, children chasing each other between piles of figs and linen, a scribe etching a contract into a clay tablet while a musician played a flute made from bone. Then there was Megiddo, perched on a hill where the coastal road met the path to the Jordan Valley. Its rulers could stand on the city walls and watch caravans trundle by, taxing them as they passed. "This is our treasure," they'd say, counting the silver. But Megiddo's hillside also made it a prize for armies. Century after century, people built and rebuilt there each layer of mud and stone. A new chapter in the story of who controlled this vital spot, even Jerusalem. Back then, just a small settlement on a narrow ridge had its own magic. 3 steep valleys protected it on 3 sides, like a giant's fingers curled around a jewel. Springs bubbled up from the rock, so even in drought, the people had water. From its heights, you could see for miles. A shepherd tending his flock. In the distance, a dust cloud rising where a caravan approached. The glint of sunlight on the Mediterranean, far to the west. "This place will last," the villagers must have whispered. And they were right, though, not in the way they imagined. Life in these cities was a dance of invention and survival. Stone tools gave way to copper axes, which chopped wood faster, and plowed fields deeper. Potter's wheels spun faster too, turning out bowls and jars so smooth they shone. Metalworkers mixed copper and tin to make bronze, a harder, stronger metal that could cut through wood like butter and hold an edge in battle. With bronze, farmers could plant more grain. With more grain, more people could live together. With more people came more ideas, more arguments, more stories. But here's the shadow that hung over it all. Everyone wanted a piece of Canaan. The Egyptians to the south saw its wheat fields and thought, "We could feed our armies with that." The Mesopotamians to the east eyed its trade routes and muttered, "We could grow rich from that." So armies marched through the valleys, their sandals kicking up dust, their spears glinting. Kings sent messengers to demand tribute gold, olive oil, young men to fight in foreign wars. And the people of Canaan? They learned to bend, to adapt, to smile when their hearts were heavy. Better to give a little, they'd say, than lose everything. Yet for all the danger, something extraordinary happened here. Ideas crossed paths like travelers in a market. A merchant from Egypt taught a potter how to make blue glaze. A scribe from Mesopotamia showed a farmer how to keep track of his crops with clay tokens. A shepherd from the hills shared stories of a storm god who sent rain to water the fields. Canaan became a melting pot, not just of people, but of ways of seeing the world. Do you think such a land could ever be truly at peace? Maybe for a little while. A generation might grow up without. Seeing an army might forget the taste of fear. But then, like the tide, the giants to the north and south would stir, and the dance would begin again. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, picture that bridge of a land. See the farmers bending over their fields, the traders haggling in the markets, the children chasing goats through the streets. Hear the clatter of bronze tools, the murmur of prayers, the distant rumble of a caravan approaching. This is where it all began, not with kings or battles, but with people, building lives in a place where the earth itself seemed to hum with possibility. The stars are bright tonight, just as they were over Canaan so long ago. Let them guide you. into dreams of olive groves and mud brick walls, of rivers that sing and hills that hold secrets. Tomorrow, we'll watch as those secrets start to unfold, one brick, one story, one heartbeat at a time. Centuries slipped by like water through fingers, and the small villages of corn farmers began to stretch and grow like cornstalks reaching for the sun. By 1000 BC, what had been clusters of huts were turning into something more: communities. With plazas where people gathered, skilled craftsmen who made more than just tools, and leaders who did more than just organize hunts. This was the slow, quiet birth of Maya society, a world where everyone had a place, and every task, no matter how small, woven into the fabric of daily life. Let us walk through one such village, nestled between a forest and a river. The air, smells of wood smoke and roasting corn. Near the center, women grind masa on stone metates, their hands moving in a rhythm as old as the hills. A group of men returns from the forest, carrying a deer slung between two poles, their laughter loud. And warm, by the river, children splash and play, but stop to watch two elders argue over where to dig a new irrigation ditch. Too close to the hut, one says, pointing. The roots will rot, the other replies, shaking his head. This is how decisions are made, not by kings, but by people who know their land. Social division, once simple, was growing more complex. Not everyone farmed full-time anymore. There were men who specialized in shipping obsidian into blades, sharper than a shark's tooth tools, that made farming and hunting easier. Women wove cloth dyed with bright colors from flowers and insects, creating garments that weren't just for warmth, but for showing off. A red cloak for a successful hunter, a blue skirt for a woman who'd borne many children. There were even a few wise ones, men and women who remembered stories of the past, knew which plants healed fevers, and could read the stars to predict when rain would come. Why do we need specialists? A curious child might ask. The answer? Because when people focus on one skill, they get very good at it, and that makes the whole community stronger. As communities grew, so did their need to make sense of the world. Why did the sun rise and set? Why did rain fall some years and not others? Why did people die? The Maya turned to religion, not just prayers, but elaborate rituals that connected them to the gods they believed watched over every corner of life. They built small platforms of earth and stone at the edge of villages' simple structures, but sacred ones. Here, priests, men and women who'd studied the old stories, led ceremonies to honor the corn god, a plump, smiling deity who ensured good harvests. During planting season, they'd offer him a bowl of the first cornmeal. During harvest, a feast with roasted turkey and honey. These rituals weren't just about pleasing the gods. They held the community together. Imagine a harvest ceremony. The entire village gathers at the platform, dressed in their finest clothes. The priest, wearing a headdress of feathers, chants prayers while shaking a rattle made from a gourd. Children dance around the fire, mimicking deer and birds. Elders share stories of how the corn god sacrificed himself to feed the people, his blood turning into cornstalks, his flesh into kernels. We are all part of this story, the priest says, holding up a cob of corn. We plant, we nurture, we harvest, and one day we return to the earth, just as he did. In that moment, differences fade. Farmer and hunter, young and old, they are all one people, bound by faith. But the Maya weren't alone in Mesoamerica. To the west, a powerful civilization called the Olmecs was flourishing. The Olmecs carved colossal stone heads, traded jade, and obsidian across vast distances, and had complex ideas about kingship and the cosmos. Their merchants traveled far and wide, and some reached Maya villages, bringing more than just goods. They brought ideas. Imagine a Maya child watching an Olmec merchant unload his goods. A jade necklace polished to a shine, obsidian blade, so clear you could see a reflection, and small clay figurines of gods with jaguar faces. Who made these? The child asks. The Olmecs, the merchant replies, pride in his voice. They have kings who talk to the gods, and scribes who write down their words. The Maya listened. They began to carve their own stone monuments, not as big as the Olmec heads, but similar in spirit. They adopted symbols, simple pictures that stood for words, and started using them to mark important events, like a good harvest or the birth of a leader. They even borrowed the Olmec calendar, a system that tracked days and months with the precision of a well-tuned clock. This wasn't copying, it was adaptation. The Maya took what worked from the Olmecs and made it their own. Their stone platforms grew larger, turning into ceremonial centers with multiple platforms and plazas. In places like Nakbi, in northern Guatemala, they built mounds of earth 45 feet high small, compared to later pyramids, but towering over the jungle all the same. These centers weren't just for rituals. They were meeting spots where traders exchanged goods, where leaders settled disputes, where stories were told under the stars. By 500 BC, the transformation was clear. Villages had become something new. They were still tied to their cornfields, still dependent on the kindness of the gods, but they were also hubs of culture, trade, and ideas. The community had grown beyond family ties. It was a network of people who relied on each other, who shared beliefs, who dreamed of something bigger than themselves. As the sun sets on one of these early ceremonial centers, the priest stands on the largest platform, watching the stars appear. He thinks about the Olmec merchants, about the stories he's heard, about the corn that feeds his people. We are learning, he whispers to the night, and one day we will build something even greater. The jungle canopy thickened as the centuries rolled on, but beneath it, something extraordinary was taking shape. By 600 BC, the simple villages and ceremonial platforms of earlier times were being dwarfed by something new. True cities, with stone plazas, towering platforms, and monuments that spoke in a language of carvings and symbols. This was the age when the Maya stopped just living in the jungle and started shaping it, leaving their mark in stone that would outlast even the tallest trees. Nakbe, nestled in the Petén rainforests of northern Guatemala, was one of the first to rise. Imagine standing at its heart, a vast plaza paved with limestone, where dust kicked up by sandals mingled with the scent of incense. Around it, platforms of cut stone rose like steps to the sky, some 45 feet high each, topped with wooden temples. That vanished long ago, but whose stone foundations still whisper of their grandeur. These weren't just piles of rock. They were statements. We are here. We are strong. We belong. What drove this transformation? Population growth. 4. 1. As corn yields improved, villages swelled, and with more people came a need for stronger leadership. No longer could a village elder handle disputes, organize harvests, and negotiate with neighboring communities alone. A new kind of leader emerged, someone who could command labor, make bold decisions, and crucially, claim a connection to the gods. These early rulers weren't yet the divine kings of later times, but they were on their way. Men, and sometimes women, who wore fancier headdresses, lived in larger huts and presided over ceremonies that linked their people to the cosmos. At Nakbi, workers quarried limestone from nearby rivers, hauling massive blocks on wooden sledges, Dozens of men straining in unison, their muscles burning, their chants keeping time. Stone carvers, now full-time specialists, chiseled patterns into the platforms. Serpents coiled around corners, jaguars peering down from ledges, symbols that might have been the first stirrings of writing. Why put so much work into stone? A curious child might ask, watching a carver's hammer rise and fall. Because stone lasts, the carver would reply, wiping sweat from his brow. Wood rots, flesh fades, but stone remembers. And then there was El Mirador, the lookout, a city so grand it would remain unmatched for centuries. Rising. Around 600 BC, it sprawled across 16 square miles, its center dominated by the La Danta complex, a pyramid so large it covered 18 acres and rose, 230 feet taller than a 20-story building. To build it, tens of thousands of workers moved over 5 million cubic yards of earth and stone, a feat that would have taken decades. Imagine the scene: teams digging clay, others shaping stones, children carrying water in gourds, priests blessing. Each new layer with offerings of corn and blood. This wasn't just construction, it was a religious act, a way of building a staircase to the gods. El Mirador's plazas were vast enough to hold thousands, where rulers addressed their people. From high platforms, their voices amplified by the stone walls. Here, they held ceremonies to mark the solstices, when the sun aligned perfectly with the city's temples, reminder that their power was tied to the heavens. Carved steely, tall stone pillars began to appear, some depicting rulers in elaborate costumes, others recording dates in the growingly complex calendar. These stelae were the Maya's first history books, telling stories of victories, marriages, and divine favors that would be remembered for generations. But the rise of these cities wasn't isolated. Trade networks crisscrossed the region. Carrying more than goods, they carried ideas. Jade from the Motagua Valley in Guatemala found its way to Nakbi, where craftsmen turned it into jewelry for rulers. Obsidian from highland volcanoes reached El Mirador, shaping tools and weapons that made construction and defense easier. Cacao beans, still rare and precious, were traded as currency, their bitter drink reserved for ceremonies where rulers communed with the gods. Social roles grew more defined. Farmers still formed the backbone of society, but now they paid tribute bags of corn, bolts of cloth to the rulers, who redistributed them to workers and priests. Priests studied the stars, calculating when to plant, when to harvest, when to wage war. Warriors, once just hunters defending their villages, became a separate class, their skills honed to protect the city and expand its influence. Everyone has a part to play, a mother might tell her child, pointing to a farmer bending over his fields, a priest staring at the sky, a warrior sharpening his obsidian blade. Like the cornstalk, we need all parts to stand tall. By 100 BC, these early cities had peaked, and then, surprisingly, many were abandoned. El Mirador, once the jewel of the Maya world, was left to the jungle, its plazas overgrown, its stele toppled by time. No one knows exactly why. Maybe drought, maybe conflict, maybe the strain of feeding such large populations. But their legacy didn't vanish. The knowledge of building with stone, of organizing large workforces, of linking rulers to the gods, all of this was passed on, like seeds waiting for the right season dot. As the jungle reclaimed El Mirador, something else was stirring. New cities would rise, learn from the old ones' mistakes, and take Maya civilization to even greater heights. The stone language spoken at Nakbi and El Mirador of power, piety, and permanence would be refined, written larger and shouted louder across the centuries. For now, though, The jungle whispered, and the stones waited. As the jungle slowly released its grip on the abandoned cities of old, a new chapter began to unfold. By the start of the 3rd century AD, the Maya world was stirring with renewed energy. Small settlements grew into thriving city-states, linked by trade routes that crisscrossed the rainforests and highlands like spiderwebs. This was the classic period, the golden age of Maya civilization, when their wisdom in the stars and with words would reach heights unmatched in the ancient Americas. Picture a map of Mesoamerica during this time. Dots of light representing cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, and Palenque, each glowing with its own unique character, yet all connected by shared traditions. Tikal, rising from the Petan lowlands, was a giant among them, its pyramids piercing the jungle canopy, its plazas bustling with merchants from distant lands. Calakmul, to the north, was its rival, a city of clever diplomats who wove alliances. Like spider silk, Copan, in the Honduran highlands, became a center of learning, while Palenque, nestled in Chiapas hills, would one day be home to a king whose name still echoes through history. These cities were not isolated kingdoms, but part of a vast network. A merchant from Tikal might travel to Calakmul with a cargo of jade jewelry, returning with cacao beans and obsidian blades. A scribe from Copan could visit Palenque to study a particularly beautiful stone carving, bringing back new ideas for writing. Even in war, which did happen, there was a strange kind of respect. Captured kings were sometimes kept as honored prisoners, their knowledge valued more than their defeat. "We are all Maya," a trader might say, pausing at a crossroads. "Even when we fight, we share the same stars." The key to this network's success was communication, and at the heart of communication was the Maya writing system, now flourishing into a sophisticated tool. What began as simple symbols on early stelae had evolved into a complex language of hieroglyphs, each a tiny work of art that could represent a word, a sound, or even an idea. Scribes, the most respected members of society, carved these glyphs into stone monuments, painted them on pottery, and wrote them in books made of folded bark paper. Imagine a scribe at work in Tikal's royal court. He sits cross-legged on a woven mat, a chisel in one hand and a hammer in the other, carefully tapping away at a limestone stela. The king, standing nearby, watches as his victory in battle is recorded forever. A glyph for capture, another for star, a third for the date, all woven together into a story that will be read by generations. Will they remember me? The king asks. They will read your name until the stones crumble, the scribe replies. Not looking up from his work, these writings weren't just about kings and battles. They recorded myths of how the gods created the world, instructions for planting corn, and even poetry about the beauty of a sunset. One surviving text, carved into a temple wall at Palenque, describes the birth of the maize god, his journey through the underworld, and his rebirth, a story that taught farmers about the cycle of life and death in their fields. Words are seeds, scribes like to say. Plant them, and they grow into history. Alongside writing, the Maya's understanding of the stars reached extraordinary heights. While European scholars were still struggling with basic astronomy, Maya astronomers tracked the movements of the sun, moon, Venus, and stars with pinpoint accuracy. They built observatories, some as simple as a cleared patch of ground with stones marking celestial positions, others as grand as the Caracol at Chichen Itza, a round tower with windows aligned to the equinoxes. Why did they care so much about the sky? For the Maya, the stars were more than pretty lights. They were a calendar, a guide, and a mirror of the gods' will. The sun's path told them when to plant corn. The moon's phases dictated when to hold religious ceremonies. Venus' 584-day cycle warned of times for war or peace. The heavens are a book, a priest astronomer might explain to a group of children, pointing to Venus, and we are learning to read it. Their calendar system was a masterpiece of complexity, combining multiple cycles into one. The long count tracked time from a mythical creation date, August 11th, 3114 BC, according to modern calculations, allowing them to record dates hundreds of years in the past or future. The Heb, a 365-day solar calendar, governed agricultural life, while the Socan, a 260-day sacred calendar, determined when to perform rituals. When these cycles aligned, every 52 years, it was cause for massive celebration, a time to renew the world and ensure the sun would rise again. Mathematics was the hidden engine behind all this. The Maya invented the concept of 0 centuries before it appeared in India, allowing them to make complex calculations. They used a base 20 system. We used base 10 that let them count into the millions, useful for tracking long periods of time. A scribe might scratch numbers into a clay tablet, dots for 1 south, bars for 5 south, and a shell symbol for 0 simple marks that held the power to map the universe. This explosion of knowledge wasn't just for elites. Farmers might not read hieroglyphs, but they knew the calendar by heart, planting their corn when the Pleiades star cluster rose at dawn. Mothers told their children stories of the moon goddess Ixchel, who watched over weavers and healers. Even traders, traveling between cities, could recognize basic glyphs on market signs, knowing which ones meant cacao or jade. By the 6th century AD, the classic period was in full bloom. Cities grew larger, their pyramids taller, their stelae more elaborate. Kings claimed direct descent from the gods, performing bloodletting ceremonies to communicate with the supernatural world. Artists created pottery with scenes of court life, rulers feasting, warriors dancing, scribes writing, offering a glimpse into a society that valued both strength and wisdom. But even in this golden age, shadows lurked. The very success of these cities put strain on the land. More people meant more farms, more trees cut down, more water used. Some scholars think this began a slow unraveling, though no one knew it yet. For now, the Maya world was bright with the light of knowledge of stars, of words, of how to turn stone and ideas into something eternal. As night fell over Tikal, priests climbed the steps of Temple 4, the tallest pyramid, to watch the stars rise. Below, in the plazas, scribes copied texts by torchlight, their fingers stained with ink. Farmers slept in their huts, dreaming of the next harvest, guided by the same stars that guided their kings. In that moment, all was aligned, the heavens, the earth, and the people who lived between them. By the 7th century AD, the Maya world had reached a crescendo of creativity and power, like a symphony playing its most magnificent movement. The cities of the classic period weren't just places to live, they were statements to the gods, to each other, and to the ages. Tikal, rising like a stone mountain range from the Payton rainforest, stood at the center of it all, its pyramids so tall they pierced the clouds and were visible for miles. This was a civilization at its peak, where architecture, art, and society had been refined to a brilliance that still takes our breath away. Let us begin with Tikal, the great jaguar of Maya cities. Imagine walking through its central plaza. At dawn, the air is thick with the scent of frangipani and damp earth. To your left, Temple I, the great jaguar temple, climbs 144 feet into the sky. its stone sides carved with images of the king Jasa Kan Kea Will I, who built it to celebrate his victory over a rival city. To your right, Temple 2, the Moon Temple, shimmers in the morning light, its silhouette perfectly aligned with Temple I, creating a frame for the rising sun during equinoxes. This wasn't accidental. Every stone, every step, every plaza was placed with mathematical precision, as if the city itself were a giant calendar, marking the passage of time and the will of the gods. Tikal's population swelled to over 60,000, larger than many European cities of the time. To support this, farmers worked terraced fields in raised beds in nearby swamps, producing enough corn to feed the masses. Merchants filled the plazas, selling obsidian from the highlands, jade from the Matagua Valley, and cacao from the lowlands. Priests climbed the tallest pyramids to study the stars, their observations recorded on stelae that lined the plazas like silent sentinels. Why build so high? A child might ask, craning their neck to see the top of Temple 4, which soared 230 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty. To be closer to the gods, their mother would reply, and to show the world what we can do. Far to the north, Calakmul challenged Tikal's dominance, but with a different kind of power. Where Tikal relied on military might, Calakmul wove a web of alliances through marriage and trade, its influence stretching over 50 smaller cities. Its great plaza was surrounded by palaces with vaulted ceilings, an architectural trick that made them cooler in the jungle heat and stelae, depicting not just warriors, but diplomats and queens. Calakmul's kings understood that true power wasn't just about winning battles, but about winning hearts and trade routes. In the Honduran highlands, Copan became a center of wisdom rather than warfare. Its most famous monument, the hieroglyphic stairway, climbed 63 steps, each side covered in over 2,500 glyphs, the longest continuous Maya text ever found. It tells the story of Copan's dynasty, starting with Kayanich Mo, the founder king, who arrived in 426 AD and built the city from scratch. Nearby, the ball court is carved with images of players wearing padded uniforms, their faces a mix of determination and joy. Copan's kings weren't just rulers, they were patrons of art and learning, turning their city into a kind of ancient university. Then there was Palenque, nestled in the misty hills of Chiapas, Mexico. Under the rule of Kayanich Janab Pekol the Great, who reigned for 68 years, Palenque became a masterpiece of elegant architecture. Its buildings, like the Temple of the Inscriptions, have a lightness to them, with delicate carvings of gods and flowers that seem to dance across the stone. Pekol's tomb, discovered deep inside the temple in 1952, contained a jade mask so beautiful, it's still considered one of the world's greatest treasures. The inscriptions on his sarcophagus tell of his journey to the underworld after death, where he would become a god, proof that Maya kings weren't just connected to the divine, but could become divine themselves. Art flourished alongside architecture. Potters created vases with scenes so detailed they looked like moving pictures. Kings sitting on thrones, warriors preparing for battle, women grinding corn, even gods playing ball in the underworld. These weren't just decorations, they were stories teaching the Maya about their history and beliefs. Jade workers carved necklaces, earrings, and masks, turning the green stone into symbols of life and power. Only the elite could wear jade, but even commoners owned small pottery figurines of gods and animals. Keeping the divine close to home. Society had become a well-oiled machine, with every person having a role to play. At the top were the Ajawab, kings who claimed descent from the gods and performed bloodletting ceremonies to communicate with the supernatural. Below them were Aha, nobles, who governed villages, led armies, and served as scribes. Priests, or men, studied the stars, kept the calendars, and led rituals. Then there were the artisans, potters, jade carvers, stonemasons who created the luxury goods that made Maya culture so rich. At the base were the commoners, farmers, fishermen, and laborers who worked the land and built the pyramids, paid in food and protection. Even slaves, usually prisoners of war, had a place, working as household servants or farm laborers. What held this complex society together? A shared belief in the cosmic order, the idea that humans, gods, and nature were all connected, each with a part to play. Kings performed bloodletting not just to show their power, but to feed the gods, ensuring rain would fall and crops would grow. Farmers gave tribute to the king, not out of fear, but because they believed it helped maintain balance in them. World. Even the ball game, played in every city, was a ritual that reenacted the battle between order and chaos, with the winners ensuring the sun would rise again. By the 8th century, the classic period was at its height. Tikle's pyramids were visible for miles. Copan's stairway told its story to anyone who could read, and Palenque's art dazzled all who saw it. Traders traveled thousands of miles, carrying goods and ideas between cities. Scribes wrote books, filled with astronomy, medicine, and mythology, preserving knowledge for future generations. For a brief, brilliant moment, the Maya world seemed perfectly aligned with the stars, rooted in the earth and bound together by faith. But even perfection has its limits. As cities grew larger, they needed more food, more wood, more water. Farmers cleared more land, cutting down forests that had protected the soil. Rivers and wells began to run dry during droughts. Some kings fought more wars, taking prisoners to use as slaves or sacrifices, but this only made things worse. No one knew it yet, but the seeds of decline had been planted, watered by success, but soon to be choked by the very growth that had made the classic period so great. For now, though, the Maya world was a wonder. As the sun set over Palenque, casting golden light on Pakal's tomb, as priests in Tikal chanted to the evening star, as farmers in Copan harvested their corn, all felt part of something eternal. They were building not just cities, but a legacy that would outlive them, carved in stone and written in stars. By the 9th century, a strange stillness began to settle over the Maya lowlands. The clatter of stone carvers' hammers, the chants of priests on temple steps, the bustle of merchants in plazas, all these sounds faded like a song slowly dying. Away. One by one, the great cities of the south were abandoned. Tikle's plazas grew over with grass. Copan's hieroglyphic stairway was swallowed by vines. Palenque's temples echoed only with the calls of howler monkeys. It was as if the jungle itself had stretched out its green arms and pulled the cities back into its embrace. But why? What turned a civilization at its peak into a ghost of itself? Let us start with the land, the very earth that had sustained the Maya for centuries. By the late 8th century, the demand for food to feed growing cities had pushed farming to its limits. Farmers chopped down vast swaths of forest to clear new fields, but without trees to hold the soil, rain washed away the rich topsoil, leaving behind hard, unproductive earth. The corn grows shorter each year, a farmer might mutter, staring at stunted stalks in a field that once yielded bumper crops. Terraces built to prevent erosion couldn't keep up, and swamplands drained for raised fields began to dry up, their fertile muck turning to dust. Then came the droughts. Tree rings from the region tell a grim story. The 8th and 9th centuries. were some of the driest in a millennium. Rivers that had watered fields and filled reservoirs shrank to trickles. Wells went dry, leaving people to fight over muddy puddles. In Tikal, where engineers had built a network of reservoirs to hold 900,000 gallons of water, the stone basins stood empty, their bottoms cracked by the sun. "The gods have turned their faces from us," a priest might whisper as he stared up at a cloudless sky, wondering why his prayers for rain went unanswered. Without water, corn withered, and hunger spread like a plague. Hunger bred war. As food grew scarce, cities that once traded peacefully began to fight over the remaining resources. Tikal and Kalakmul, rivals for centuries, clashed more fiercely than ever, their armies burning fields and destroying water systems to weaken each other. Smaller cities, caught in the middle, were sacked and abandoned, their people fleeing to the hills. In Das Pilas, a city once allied with Kalakmul, archaeologists found evidence of violent destruction. Monuments smashed, palaces burned, skeletons with cut marks suggesting execution. "We used to trade jade for corn," an elder might recall, shaking his head. "Now we fight over a handful of beans." War, in turn, shattered the social order. The divine kings who had claimed to protect their people and keep the gods happy now looked powerless. If a king couldn't make it rain or win a battle, why should anyone follow him? In some cities, people stopped building monuments to their rulers. No more stele carved with royal triumphs. No more temples dedicated to their glory. "He sits in his palace while our children starve," villagers might grumble, their loyalty fraying like an old woven cloak. Some even rose up, burning royal residences and defacing statues. Rare act of rebellion in a society that had long revered its kings. The breakdown of trade made everything worse. With roads unsafe and cities at war, merchants stopped traveling. Obsidian, needed for tools and weapons, became scarce. Jade, once a symbol of status, disappeared from markets. Cacao, the food of the gods that had served as currency, grew hard to find, making it impossible to pay workers or buy goods from far away. Communities that had relied on imported food or materials were left to fend for themselves, like ships cut loose from their anchors. Slowly, people began to leave. Farmers packed up their families and moved to the highlands or the northern Yucatan, where water was more reliable and land less overworked. Scribes, their skills no longer needed to record royal victories, abandoned their bark paper books, leaving them to rot in abandoned palaces. Even priests, whose rituals now felt hollow, joined the exodus, taking their knowledge of stars and calendars to new lands. By 900 AD, the southern lowlands, once the heart of Maya civilization, were largely empty, their cities silent except for the wind whistling through broken doorways. But was this a collapse or a transformation? That's the question historians still argue over. The Maya didn't vanish. They simply moved, taking their language, their farming skills, and their beliefs with them. In the north, new cities would rise, like Chichen Itza, built by the descendants of these refugees. They would learn from the mistakes of the south, not over-farming, not relying too much on one king, not forgetting that even the mightiest cities depend on the land beneath them. As the jungle reclaimed Tikal's pyramids, covering them in moss and vines, it wasn't the end of the Maya story, just a pause. The stones might have fallen silent, but the people lived on, carrying their culture like a seed hidden in the soil, waiting for the right time to grow again. While the southern lowlands fell silent, a new chapter was being written in the sun-baked plains and limestone hills of the Yucatan Peninsula. By the 10th century, the Maya weren't just surviving, They were thriving again, but in a way that would have surprised their ancestors. This was the post-classic period, a time of reinvention, where old traditions mixed with new ideas, and a city called Chichen Itza would rise to become one of the greatest in MESOA, MERICA. To understand this rebirth, we must first picture the migrants, farmers from Tikal, scribes from Copan, traders from Palenque, all packing their few belongings and heading north. They left behind the overworked soils and dry reservoirs of the south, drawn to the Yucatan cenote's natural sinkholes, filled with crystal clear water that promised a reliable water source even during droughts. The gods have given. Use a new home, a mother might say, as her children leaned over a sennete's edge, marveling at the fish swimming in its depths. At first, these northern settlements were small, humble places, clusters of thatched huts around simple stone platforms, much like the earliest Maya villages. But as more people arrived, they began to build, drawing on the skills of their ancestors, but also experimenting with new ideas. They learned to farm the Yucatan's thin, rocky soil by rotating crops and using ash from burned vegetation to fertilize fields. They traded salt from coastal lagoons and cotton grown in the dry plains, building new networks that stretched across the peninsula, and beyond that became Chichen Itza. Sometime around the 10th century, this once small settlement began to grow, fueled by trade, innovation, and a willingness to embrace ideas from faraway lands. What made Chichen Itza different? It was a crossroads, a place where Maya traditions met influences from central Mexico, particularly the Toltecs, a warrior civilization from the highlands. Imagine walking through Chichen Itza's great plaza. At the height of its power, to your left stands El Castillo, the castle, a step pyramid unlike any built in the classic period. Its sides are clean and angular, with a staircase on each face, and at the top, a small temple dedicated to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent. This wasn't just a temple, it was a calendar made of stone. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, the afternoon sun cast shadows that looked like a serpent slithering down the northern staircase, Kukulkan descending to earth. The pyramid talks to us, a priest might explain, pointing to the shadow. It tells us when the gods are watching. Nearby, the temple of the warriors stretches out like a giant's hand, its facade lined with hundreds of stone columns carved to look like warriors in Toltec-style headdresses. This wasn't the delicate, nature-inspired art of the classic Maya. It was bold, muscular, and full of symbols of power. The Toltecs had brought with them ideas of warrior cults and human sacrifice, and Chichen Itza embraced these, blending them with Maya traditions of astronomy and ritual. The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza is another masterpiece of this cultural fusion. At over 500 feet long, it's the largest ball court in Mesoamerica, with walls that rise 30 feet high. Carved into the walls are scenes of the game's final moments. Players falling to their knees, their heads being cut off, blood pouring into the mouths of waiting gods. Unlike the classic period, where the ball game was more about cosmic balance, here it had a darker edge linked to war, sacrifice, and the need to keep the gods strong. Yet even in this, there's Maya ingenuity. The court's acoustics are so perfect that a whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other, and a clap echoes like the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. Chichen Itza's success also came from its economy. Located near cenotes and trade routes, it became a hub for exchanging goods. Jade from the south, obsidian from the highlands, gold from Central America, and even cacao, which still served as currency. Merchants from as far away as what is now Honduras and Belize flocked to its markets, where they could buy salt dried in the Yucatan sun or fine cotton cloth dyed with bright colors. Chichen Itza doesn't just trade, a merchant might boast. It connects the world. Society in this new era was different too. While classic kings had been divine rulers focused on bloodletting and ancestor worship, Chichen Itza's leaders seemed more like military commanders and trade chiefs. They still claimed connections to the gods. Kukulkan was said to be both a god and a legendary ruler who brought wisdom to the city, but their power came as much from armies and trade networks as from divine birth. Common people, too, had more opportunities. Skilled artisans could become wealthy making goods for trade, and farmers who grew cotton or cacao could rise above subsistence. Not all northern cities followed Chichen Itza's path. Uxmal, a rival city to the west, kept more of the classic Maya's elegance, with buildings like the Palace of the Governor, its facade covered in intricate stone mosaics of masks and serpents. But even Uxmal showed signs of change, with broader plazas and more emphasis on public ceremonies, signs that post-classic society was more about community than just royal glory. By the 12th century, Chichen Itza was at its peak, a city of thousands, with markets, temples, and neighborhoods where Maya, Toltec, and other peoples lived side by side. It was a testament to the Maya's ability to adapt, to take what worked from the past and mix it with new ideas, to turn a crisis into an opportunity. But like all great cities, Chichen Itza eventually faded. By 1200 AD, its plazas were empty, its temples abandoned. No one knows exactly why. Maybe war with rival cities, maybe trade routes shifting, maybe environmental changes. But again, the Maya didn't disappear. They moved to new cities, like Mayapan, and continued to build, to trade, to worship. The northern wasn't just about one city. It was about a civilization refusing to die. The Maya had learned from the fall of the South to value water, to trade widely, to embrace new ideas. In doing so, they wrote a new chapter in their story, one that would last until the arrival of strangers from across the ocean. Centuries later, as the sun set over Chichen Itza's silent pyramids, casting long shadows over the great plaza, it was easy to think of it as an end. But for the Maya, it was always just a pause. The cenotes still held water, the markets still waited to be filled, and the knowledge of stars and seasons passed down through generations still guided their way. The 10th and 11th centuries dawned over the Yucatan Peninsula like a new day for the Maya people. The shadow of the classic collapse had lifted, and in its place rose a civilization that was both familiar and thrillingly new. At the center of this renaissance stood Chichen Itza, a city where every stone seemed to hum with purpose, where trade winds carried goods from across the known world, and where the feathered serpent god Kukulkan watched over all. This was the post-classic period at its zenith, a time when the Maya didn't just rebuild what they'd lost, but created something bolder, more connected, and more awe-inspiring than ever before. Let us linger in the heart of Chichen Itza, where the sun blazes down on limestone plazas and the air vibrates with the murmur of crowds. To truly grasp its grandeur, stand before El Castillo at noon, when the sun is high and the pyramid casts sharp shadows. Its four sides rise in perfect symmetry, 91 steps, each 364 in total, plus the top platform, making 365, one for each day of the solar year. This is no accident. The Maya, ever students of the sky, wove their understanding of time into the very bones of the building. But it is during the equinoxes that El Castillo truly comes alive. As the afternoon sun dips toward the horizon, a shadow slithers down the northern staircase. A diamondback serpent, its body formed by the pyramid's edges, its head at the base, as if Kukulkan himself is descending to earth. Priests and pilgrims gather to watch, gasping as the shadow moves, their prayers mixing with the rustle of wind through palm leaves. "He comes," they whisper. "The feathered serpent has heard us." Nearby, the temple of the warriors stretches. Across the plaza, like a legion frozen in stone. Its facade is a forest of columns, 48 in total, each carved to resemble a warrior in full regalia. Feathered headdresses, jade necklaces, and shields emblazoned with the symbol of Kukulkan. These aren't just decorations, they're a statement. Chichen Itza was a warrior city, and its gods demanded strength, courage, and sacrifice. Inside the temple, murals depict battles, Maya warriors clashing with enemies, captives being led away, and priests offering blood to the gods. The Toltec influence is clear here: bold lines, dramatic poses, a focus on martial glory, but the Maya have made it their own, blending it with their love of symbolism and story. The Great Ball Court is another marvel, and not just for its size. At over 500 feet long, it's the largest in Mesoamerica, but its genius lies in its details. The walls rise 30 feet high, their surfaces covered in carvings that tell the story of the game, a cosmic struggle between the forces, of life, represented by the sun, and death, the underworld. At one end, a stone ring jets out from the wall, 20 feet above the ground. The goal: hitting a rubber ball through that ring would have been a miracle, but the game was never just about scoring. The carvings show the losing team's captain being decapitated, his blood nourishing the earth and ensuring the sun would rise again. Yet even in this violence, there's beauty. The court's acoustics are so precise that a whisper at one end echoes clearly at the other, and a clap sounds like the cry of the quetzal, the sacred bird of the Maya. The ball court speaks, a player might say, tapping the stone wall. It tells us that every game is a battle for the world. Religion in Chichen Itza was a spectacular community affair, far more public than the intimate ceremonies of the classic period. At the center of it all was Kukulkan, the feathered serpent, a god who blended the Maya's ancient serpent deities with the Toltec god Quetzalcoatl. He was a god of creation, of wisdom, and of storms, and his temple at Chichen Itza was the city's beating heart. During festivals, priests climbed El Castillo's steps to burn incense and offer sacrifices, sometimes animals, occasionally humans, though far fewer than Spanish accounts later exaggerated. The goal was to keep Kukulkan's favor, to ensure rain for crops and safety for traders. He is both feather and fang, a priest might explain to a child, gentle when pleased, fierce when angered. The sacred cenote, a natural sinkhole over 100 feet deep, was another focal point of worship. Its dark waters were said to be a portal to the underworld, where the rain god Chalk lived. Archaeologists have pulled thousands of artifacts from its depths: gold discs, jade figurines, pottery, and even human remains offerings thrown in during times of drought or crisis. The cenote drinks, people whispered. It carries our prayers to the gods. Pilgrims traveled from across the Yucatan to toss offerings into its waters, making Chichen Itza not just a city, but a holy site. Trade was the lifeblood of this splendor. Chichen Itza's location, near the coast and crisscrossed by overland routes, made it a hub for goods from as far north as Mexico City and as far south as Panama. Salt harvested from coastal lagoons was packed into clay, jars, and sent inland, where it was as valuable as gold for preserving food. Cotton, grown in the Yucatan's dry plains, was woven into cloth dyed with indigo and cochineal, creating textiles that were traded for obsidian, jade, and cacao. Merchants traveled in caravans of pack animals or in large canoes along the coast, their cargoes guarded by warriors. In Chichen Itza's markets, you might see a Maya merchant haggling with a Toltec trader over a pile of turquoise, or a sailor from Honduras bartering for cotton cloth. The world comes to us, a market vendor might boast, arranging her pottery on a mat, and we send our goods to the world. This trade network didn't just move goods, it moved ideas. Architects from Chichen Itza traveled to other cities like Uxmal and Mayapan, sharing their knowledge of pyramid building and urban planning. Scribes copied astronomical charts and religious texts, spreading Chichen Itza's version of Maya cosmology across the peninsula. Even the ball game, with its new focus on sacrifice and war, became a shared tradition. Played in courts from the Yucatan to Belize. Society in Chichen Itza was more fluid than in the classic period. While there were still nobles and priests, wealth and status could be earned through trade or military skill. A successful merchant might live in a stone house with a courtyard, while a warrior who captured enemies in battle could rise to become a leader. Women, too, had roles beyond the home. Some were weavers whose textiles were sought after in distant markets. Others were priestesses who served in Kukulkan's temple. A person's worth is in their deeds, a mother might tell her child, not just in who their father was. By the 11th century, Chichen Itza's influence stretched across the Yucatan like a shadow. Its architecture set the standard for other cities. Its version of the ball game became the norm. Its worship of Kukulkan was adopted far and wide. It was more than a city, it was an idea, that the Maya could rise from ruin, that they could blend old and new, that they could be both warriors and scholars, traders and priests. But even the brightest stars fade. By the 12th century, Chichen Itza began to decline. No one knows exactly why. Perhaps trade routes shifted. Perhaps war broke out with rival cities like Mayapan. Perhaps the Senate's waters began to run low. Whatever the cause, its plazas grew quiet, its temples were abandoned, and the feathered serpent's shadow stopped drawing crowds. Yet the splendor of the post-classic period wasn't confined to one city. Mayapan, which rose to power after Chichen Itza's fall, continued the tradition of trade and innovation, as did smaller cities across the Yucatan. The Maya had learned to adapt, to thrive in a world that demanded flexibility and resilience. As the sun sets over Chichen Itza's silent pyramids, casting gold over the great ball court and the sacred cenote, we can almost hear the echoes of what once was, the chants of priests, the clatter of merchants, the cheers of ball game spectators. This was the Maya at their most vibrant civilization. They refused to be defined by collapse. That turned loss into renewal, and that left a legacy of stone, story, and spirit that still inspires wonder today. As the 12th century unfolded, the Yucatan Peninsula hummed with a new kind of energy. The fall of Chichen Itza had left a power vacuum, but instead of descending into chaos, the Maya did something remarkable. They banded together. What emerged was the League of Mayapan, a loose confederation of cities that would bring stability to the region for over 2 centuries. This wasn't the rigid hierarchy of the classic period or the single-city dominance of Chichen Itza. It was a fragile, ever-shifting balance of power, where alliances mattered more than conquest, and survival depended on knowing when to cooperate and when to stand firm. To understand Mayapan and its league, imagine a gathering of chiefs in a sunlit plaza. Representatives from cities like Uxmal, Izamal, and Situda sit cross-legged on woven mats, their faces serious but respectful. At the head of the circle is a chief from Mayapan, wearing a headdress of quetzal feathers and a cloak, stitched with symbols of the League. "We have fought too long," he says, his voice carrying over the crowd. "The jungle does not care which city we come from. It will swallow us all if we do not stand together." The others nod, murmuring in agreement. This is how the League began, not with a battle, but with a conversation, a recognition that no single city could thrive alone. The League of Mayapan was a clever solution to the chaos of the post-Chichen era. Unlike the divine kings of the classic period, who ruled with absolute power, Mayapan's leaders shared authority with a council of chiefs from allied cities. They met regularly to negotiate trade deals, settle disputes, and plan joint defense against outside threats. Tribute flowed into Mayapan from smaller cities, but it wasn't just about wealth. It was a symbol of unity, a way of saying, we are part of something larger. Mayapan itself was a city built for this new order. Its center wasn't dominated by a single giant pyramid, but by a cluster of smaller temples, palaces, and plaza spaces designed for meetings, not just royal ceremonies. The city's walls, 12 feet thick and 5 miles long, weren't just for show. They were a reminder that the League faced constant threats, from rival groups in the highlands to nomadic raiders from the coast. "The wall protects us all, eh?" Guard might say, patrolling the ramparts at dusk, but only if we all guard it. Military life took on new importance in this era. The Maya had always fought wars, but now, with the League's survival at stake, warfare became more organized, more strategic. Warriors trained from childhood, practicing with spears, bows and arrows, and makuahuitls wooden clubs studded with sharp obsidian blades. Unlike the classic period, when battles were often timed to celestial events, post-classic wars were fought for practical reasons: control of trade routes, access to cenotes, or revenge for a broken alliance. Fortifications became common too. Cities like Mayapan and Uxmal surrounded themselves with walls, and watchtowers dotted the countryside, keeping an eye out for approaching armies. Even small villages built stockades and dug moats, turning themselves into tiny fortresses. Better to build a wall than bury the dead, a village elder might say, as his neighbors stacked stones to reinforce their defenses. Yet the League wasn't just about war, it was about culture, too. The Maya of this era were determined to preserve their traditions while adapting to new times. Priests continued to study the stars, updating the calendar to reflect changing agricultural patterns. Scribes copied ancient myths onto bark paper, adding new stories about the League's founding to keep the past alive. Artists blended classic Maya motifs, jaguars, serpents, gods with new styles, creating pottery and stone carvings that felt both familiar and fresh. One of the most striking cultural shifts was the rise of merchant guilds. These groups of traders, bound by oaths and shared customs, traveled the League's roads with caravans of goods: cotton cloth from Mayapan, salt from the coast, cacao from the southern lowlands. They were more than just businessmen. They were diplomats, carrying news between cities and smoothing tensions with gifts of jade or fine textiles. A merchant's pack holds more than goods, a trader might joke. It holds peace. Women's roles expanded in unexpected ways, too. While they still tended to homes and farms, many also became skilled weavers. Their textiles so prized, they were used as currency in League markets. Some noble women served as scribes or priestesses, preserving stories or leading small ceremonies. In times of war, women defended villages alongside men, wielding knives or throwing stones from behind walls. The League needs all its people, a mother might tell her daughter, as she taught her to weave symbols of strength into a cloak. But for all its success, the League faced constant challenges. Tensions flared between Mayapan and its allies, as smaller cities resented paying tribute or following orders. Droughts still struck, drying up cenotes and ruining crops, testing the League's ability to share resources. Raiders from the north, known as the Itza, occasionally attacked, burning villages and stealing cattle. And as the years passed, the Council of Chiefs grew more divided, with some pushing for a stronger, more centralized government, while others fought to keep power in the hands of individual cities. By the 14th century, cracks were showing. A civil war broke out between Mayapan and its former allies, leaving the city in ruins and the League shattered. For a time, the Yucatan returned to chaos, with small cities fighting over scraps of power. But even in this, the Maya showed their resilience. New leaders emerged, old alliances were reborn, and life went on farming, trading, worshiping, just as it had for centuries. The League of Mayapan may not have lasted forever, but it left a powerful legacy, a vision of the Maya as a single people, bound by shared history and mutual need. It proved that they could adapt, that they could trade war for cooperation, and that even in a world of challenges, community could be their greatest strength. As the sun set over the ruins of Mayapan, a farmer gathered his tools, his mind already on tomorrow's planting. Nearby, children chased each other among the fallen stones, laughing as they pretended to be chiefs and warriors. The League was gone, but the Maya were still there, still building, still hoping, still writing their story. The 16th century dawned over the Yucatan Peninsula, but this was no ordinary sunrise. A new kind of light appeared on the horizon. Strange ships with billowing sails, carrying men in metal armor, wielding weapons that roared like thunder. To the Maya, these were not just strangers. They were something unthinkable, a foreign sun that would cast a long, dark shadow over their world. The arrival of the Spanish would shatter their way of life. Yet in the cracks of destruction, their culture would cling to life, stubborn and unbroken. The first encounters were tentative, almost surreal. In 1511, a Spanish ship wrecked off the coast of the Yucatan, and a handful of survivors staggered onto shore. The Maya, curious but cautious, took them in. Two men, Gonzalo Guerrero and Geronimo de Aguilar, would live among the Maya for years. Guerrero married a noblewoman, adopted their dress and customs, and even fought alongside them as a warrior. Aguilar, though, clung to his Spanish identity, learning the Maya language but waiting for rescue. Their stories would foreshadow the divided future to come. Some Maya would resist, some would adapt, but none would remain untouched. When Hernan Cortes arrived in 1519, seeking gold and glory for Spain, he brought with him more than soldiers. He brought disease, smallpox, measles, typhus germs the Maya had never encountered, for which their bodies had no defense. It began with fever, then rashes, then death. Villages that once hummed with life fell silent. Fields lay unplanted as farmers sickened. Ceremonies stopped as priests died. "It is a curse from the gods," people whispered, not knowing the invisible enemy was carried in the breath of the strangers. By some estimates, 90% of the Maya population would perish in the decades that followed. A demographic catastrophe unlike any in history. With the Maya weakened by disease, the Spanish turned to war. Their metal swords and armor, their horses, which the Maya had never seen and at first thought were gods, and their guns gave them a terrifying advantage. But the Maya fought back with fierce courage. In the highlands of Guatemala, the Quechua kingdom led a valiant resistance. attacking Spanish camps and destroying their supplies. In the Yucatan, cities like Mayapan and Champoton held out. For years, their warriors using the jungle to ambush Spanish patrols. "We will not kneel," a chief shouted to his men as they sharpened their obsidian blades. "This is our land, and we will die for it." Yet resistance could only delay the inevitable. One by one, cities fell. The Spanish burned temples, smashed idols, and executed leaders, seeking to break the Maya spirit. They imposed a system called the encomienda, which forced Maya villagers to work on Spanish farms or in mines, often as little more than slaves. "You will work for us, and in return, we will teach you about our God," the Spanish told them. But for the Maya, it felt like theft of their land, their labor, their very freedom. The greatest assault, though, was on their beliefs. Spanish priests, convinced the Maya gods were demons, set out to erase their religion. They burned bark paper books, called codices, that contained centuries of wisdom, astronomy, medicine, mythology, reducing most of Maya writing to ash. They forced Maya to attend Christian Mass, to baptize their children with Spanish names, to abandon ceremonies that had defined their lives for millennia. "Your gods are false," a priest would say, standing before a smashed statue of Kukulkan. "Only our God is true." But the Maya refused to forget. They learned to hide their faith in plain sight. They wove traditional symbols into Christian. Tapestry serpents coiled around crosses, corn gods disguised as saints. They celebrated Christian holidays, but in secret, added their own rituals, burning incense to the old gods, offering cornmeal to the earth. Elders whispered myths to children at night, passing down stories of the hero twins and the maize god when the Spanish weren't listening. Some even buried codices in caves, hoping they would survive the destruction. Women played a quiet but vital role in this resistance. They taught their daughters to grind corn using the old prayers, to weave cloth with patterns that told Maya stories, to heal with medicinal plants passed down from grandmother to mother to child. "The Spanish can take our temples," a mother might say, as she showed her daughter a hidden carving of Ixchel, the moon goddess, "but they cannot take what is in our hearts." By the mid-16th century, the Spanish had established control over most of the Maya lands, building towns like Merida on the ruins of ancient cities. They built churches where pyramids once stood and imposed their laws and language. Yet the Maya world was never fully erased. In remote villages, people still spoke their native languages, Yucatec, Kosh, Tzuzil, and practiced traditions. In secret, the foreign sun had risen, but the old stars still shone, dimly, behind the cloud's dot as the 17th century began. A Maya scribe in a village, hidden among the highlands, dipped his quill into ink made from tree sap. On a piece of bark paper, he wrote down the stories his grandfather had told him, the creation of the world, the adventures of the gods, the names of kings long dead. He knew he risked death if the Spanish found it, but he wrote anyway. "We are still here," the words seemed to say. "We will not be forgotten." The smoke of burning codices hung in the air, and the sound of church bells replaced the chants of Maya priests. By the mid-16th century, the Spanish had built their churches on the ruins of pyramids, renamed villages with saints' names, and forced the Maya to call them master. Yet beneath this layer of Spanish rule, like seeds buried in ash, Maya culture refused to die. It survived in whispers, in hidden rituals, in the corners of daily life where the Spanish couldn't see, and in doing so, it prepared to grow again. The Spanish thought they had won. They had destroyed temples, banned ceremonies, and taught Maya children to pray in Latin. But culture is not something you can burn or bury with a sword. It lives in how people cook, how they speak, how they love, how they grieve, and in these small, unrecorded moments, the Maya kept their world alive. Take language, for example. The Spanish tried to stamp out Maya tongues, punishing anyone who spoke them in school or church. But in homes, fields, and marketplaces, people kept talking. Mothers sang lullabies in Yucatec or K, shoo their babies. Farmers shouted jokes. In Tzotzil, as they planted corn, grandmothers told stories in Celtal by firelight. Over time, even some Spanish priests realized they needed to speak Maya to convert people, so they wrote dictionaries and grammars, unwittingly preserving the very languages they hoped to erase. Today, millions still speak these languages, each word a thread in the fabric of a culture that refused to unravel. Religion was trickier. The Maya couldn't openly worship Kukulkan or Ixchel, so they wove their old beliefs into the new Christian. Faith like threads in a tapestry. They prayed to the Virgin Mary, but secretly associated her with Ixchel, the moon goddess of fertility. They celebrated Christmas, but marked the occasion with offerings of cornmeal, just as they once had for the maize god. In remote villages, they built small shrines and caves, where they left jade figurines and cacao drinks for the old gods, hidden from Spanish eyes. The saints are kind, a Maya farmer might say, crossing himself in front of a church. But the mountain spirits still watch over our fields. Customs persisted too, in ways both large and small. The Maya continued to celebrate the changing of the seasons with feasts, though now they called them fiestas and invited the local priest. They still practiced traditional medicine, using herbs and rituals passed down for generations, even if they told the Spanish they were just following the doctor's orders. Weddings included Christian vows, but afterward, the couple would plant a tree together, a Maya tradition to ensure fertility. Funerals had Catholic prayers, but the family still buried tools and food with the dead, so their spirit would be prepared for the journey to the underworld. Resistance took quiet forms. When Spanish officials demanded too much tribute, too many bags of corn, too many days of labor, the Maya found ways to push back. They might forget to deliver the full amount, or work slowly, or pretend not to understand the orders. Sometimes they fought more openly. In 1761, a group of Maya in the Yucatan attacked a Spanish garrison, destroying records of tribute and declaring, "We are not slaves." The uprising was crushed, but it sent a message. They remembered who they were, perhaps the most powerful act of resistance was memory. The Maya knew the Spanish wanted to erase their history, so they wrote it down secretly. Priests and elders, using the Spanish alphabet to sound out their own languages, recorded myths, histories, and prophecies in books like the Chilam Balam, Jaguar Prophet. These texts, hidden in caves or passed from father to son, told of the old gods, of great kings, of a time when the Maya ruled their own lands. "We will not let them forget us," the scribes wrote, and in doing so, ensured they wouldn't be forgotten. Women were the keepers of much of this knowledge. They taught their daughters to weave cloth with patterns that told stories: serpents for wisdom, cornstalks for life, jaguars for strength. They knew which herbs cured fevers, which prayers protected children, which stars guided planting. When a mother taught her daughter to grind corn while whispering a prayer to the maize god, she wasn't just passing on a skill, she was passing on a culture. By the 18th century, the Maya world was a patchwork of adaptation and survival. Spanish towns stood alongside Maya villages. Catholic churches cast shadows over hidden shrines. Spanish was spoken in markets, but Maya languages in homes. The ash of conquest still covered the land, But under it, the seeds were stirring. A new generation was growing up, children who knew both the Lord's Prayer and the stories of the hero twins, who could count in Spanish but still tracked the seasons by the old calendar, who understood that to survive, you sometimes had to hide who you were until the time came to reveal it. As a young Maya girl walked to the river one evening, carrying a clay jar, she passed a Spanish church. She crossed herself quickly, as she'd been taught, but then glanced up at the stars, the same stars her grandmother had pointed out, the ones that told the story of Kukulkan's journey across the sky. In that moment, she was both Spanish and Maya, both conquered and unbroken. The seed in the ash was alive, and it was waiting. The morning sun rises over a market in the Guatemalan highlands, and the air hums with life. Women in vibrant huipil's blouses woven with patterns that tell stories of their villages arrange piles of corn, beans, and chili peppers. A young man sets up a stall selling hand-carved wooden masks, while an elder sits on a stool, telling stories to children clustered around him. This is not a museum exhibit or a reenactment. This is a modern Maya community with a past and present, danced together like old friends. The eternal corn that sustained their ancestors still grows in their fields, and the culture that survived conquest, disease, and neglect is now blooming again, proud, resilient, and more alive than ever. To understand this renaissance, walk through the market and listen. You'll hear a symphony of languages. Cashiers haggling over prices, Tzotzil mothers calling to their children, Spanish spoken with Maya accents. This linguistic richness was once a target of oppression. Now it's a source of pride. In schools across Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize, children learn to read and write in their native languages alongside Spanish. Why learn two languages? A curious outsider might ask. A teacher smiles, pointing to a classroom wall where a poster reads, "Our words are our roots." Because to know who you are, she says, you need to speak the language of your grandparents and the language of the world. Agriculture, the foundation of Maya civilization, has also found new life. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, still grow in fields, but now they're part of a global movement for sustainable farming. Maya farmers teach scientists from around the world how to grow crops without harmful chemicals, using methods honed over millennia, rotating fields to keep soil fertile, using ash as fertilizer, planting companion crops to ward off pests. The jungle taught us to work with the earth, not against it, a farmer explains, showing off a cornfield where stalks stand tall and healthy, even during a dry spell. In 2018, Maya communities in Guatemala won a landmark legal battle to protect their traditional seeds from corporate patents, a victory for both culture and sustainability. Politically, the Maya are no longer silent. For decades, they were marginalized. In their own countries, their voices ignored by governments. But in recent years, they've organized, voted, and demanded recognition. In Guatemala, Rigoberta Menchú Tomacaish, Maya activist, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1992 for her work defending indigenous rights. Maya politicians now serve in Congresses, pushing for laws that protect their lands and traditions. We used to whisper, a community leader says at a rally, surrounded by people waving flags with Maya symbols. Now we shout, and the world is finally listening. Art and culture have become powerful tools of reclamation. Weavers in Chiapas create textiles that blend ancient patterns with modern themes, images of climate change, political protests, even astronauts selling them in galleries from Mexico City to New York. Musicians fuse traditional drums and flutes with jazz and rock, creating a sound that is uniquely Maya and uniquely contemporary. Writers like Luis de Leon and Humberto A. Cabal publish poetry and novels in both Maya languages and Spanish, giving voice to their people's joys and struggles. Our art isn't just beautiful, a weaver says, running her fingers over a hoopil decorated with a Maya calendar. It's a story, and we're finally getting to tell it our way. Religious traditions, once hidden in caves and homes, are now celebrated openly. Each year, thousands gather at ancient sites like Tikal and Chichen Itza for solstice ceremonies, where priests in traditional dress lead prayers to the old gods alongside Catholic blessings in a blend that feels natural, not forced. At Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, Maya communities still honor Maximin, a syncretic saint who combines elements of Catholic figures and Maya deities, proving that faith can evolve without losing its soul. We don't have to choose between the gods of our ancestors and the God of the Church, a priest explains. They're all part of our story. Education has become a bridge between past and future. Universities in the region now offer degrees in Maya studies, where students learn to read hieroglyphs, study ancient astronomy, and analyze Maya legal systems, all from a Maya perspective, not just through Spanish or European eyes. Young scholars are rediscovering lost texts, translating them, and sharing them with their communities. For too long, others wrote our history, a student says, holding a copy of the Popol Vuh Nea creation myth translated into Keishi. Now we're writing it ourselves. Tourism, once a threat to Maya heritage, has become a source of empowerment. Communities near ancient sites, like Palenque and Uxmal, now run their own tour companies, hiring local guides who tell the stories of their ancestors with pride. Visitors don't just see pyramids, they learn about the people who built them, taste traditional food like tamales and pozole, and watch weavers and potters at work. This isn't just about money, a guide says, leading a group through Tikal. It's about showing the world that we're still here, that we're not just ruins. Of course, challenges remain. Many Maya communities still struggle with poverty, discrimination, and the effects of climate change, which threatens their traditional farming ways. But through it all, there's a sense of momentum, of belief that the worst is behind them and a better future is being built. One cornstalk, one word, one story at a time. As the sun sets over the highlands, a grandmother and her granddaughter walk through a cornfield, hands brushing against the tassels. The girl asks about the patterns on her grandmother's hoopil, and the old woman tells her, "This is the story of our people. The corn that fed us, the gods that watched over us, the struggles we survived. And this," she says, pointing to a new pattern stitched into the cloth, a tiny laptop, a school book, is the story we're writing now. The corn grows tall, as it has for 7,000 years. The Maya people grow with it, rooted in the past, reaching for the future. There, civilization was never lost, just hidden, like a seed in the soil. And now, in the light of a new day, it is blooming again.